Free socks.
Hello and welcome back to an update on the National PTA's LegCon conference that is going on right now. Today is Hill Day, so people are out there advocating for one of the 5 PTA asks, or potentially even some of their own state level asks. I spent a lot of time in sessions yesterday afternoon, and I wanted to recap for those of you who weren't able to attend some of the key takeaways. If I zoom out and think about what I learned from an advocacy in general perspective, I think there was a really great summary shared out about 10 ways to get started in advocacy, because the main thing is to just get started, just take action. Doing something will advance the needle. So how do you do that? For a PTA, the 10 ways to get started are: first, appoint an advocacy chair to be a member of your executive board. Second, just pick one priority that your PTA wants to work on for the school year. Third, collaborate with associations that have similar goals. Fourth, share news articles and research through the web and social media so that your community is getting information about the issue. Fifth, host educational webinars with area experts and invite everyone. Make sure it's open to your community. Sixth, develop a community event to raise awareness about a core advocacy priority. Seventh, activate your advocates. Share state PTA and national PTA and other calls to action. Eighth, watch school board meetings. Talk to your school board. Share the information. 9, follow legislators on social media and attend any town halls or roundtables. And 10, participate in virtual rallies or start a rally for your issue. So these are really great ways to get started on advocacy. Another takeaway for me related to PTA advocacy generally is how many resources are out there already. These are generally not new issues. So there are a lot of position papers or background papers on legislation that has been presented in the past. Leverage those resources and talk to the people who have put forth those bills or position statements to learn more or to partner with them. You can also partner outside of just the PTA umbrella. There are other like-minded organizations. In fact, we did a whole podcast on community service organizations, and some of them are also advocating for similar issues. So don't be afraid to reach outside of the PTA umbrella. And finally, personal stories are so critically important. When you are speaking to others to try and convince them of why this issue is important, sharing your own personal story or somebody you know's personal story really brings it home for people. If you think of Congress people or your senators, they want to be able to tell that story. They want to be able to understand this in a more deep personal way. So having that personal story to share impact is really something that will help advance your cause. So more specifically, the 4 sessions that I attended that I'm going to share a bit more detail on were about digital equity, education funding, safety, and then diversity and inclusion. With respect to digital equity, the pandemic really highlighted the digital equity issues that we had in this country. I mean, internet access is not created equal, and it certainly became an issue when a lot of schools went online this year. So Comcast, who was a sponsor of the conference, shared what they are doing, which is to provide free internet to many, but also to create these lift centers, which are Wi-Fi enabled community centers and parks that can support children who are learning remotely. There's a lot of information on digital equity out there. If your school isn't already sharing the ways that parents can have access to internet, if they cannot afford it, they should be sharing that. The information is available out there. You can just Google digital equity. A lot of information. There's also a website called Everyone On. If you go there, you can get more information as well. With respect to education funding, education funding is so disparate across the country. Some schools don't even have basic staffing covered, like they don't have a full-time principal. They don't have support teachers. They don't have enough teachers. Others have dilapidated buildings. As we discussed on our other update, buildings are an issue. School buildings are an average of 44 years old across the country, and some much older with issues like mold. Finally, other schools are suffering, unable to fund necessary programs in their schools. There's a lot that can be done around funding, particularly advocating at the state legislature level and at the federal level. But the first place to start is to look at whether this is a big issue in your state or just in your local community, because then you can figure out where you need to advocate. The metrics on per student funding as well as per student spending are available out there. Those are both important. One is how much the students are funded. The other is how much is actually spent per student. So look those up. See if it's a state level issue. If it is, then you want to advocate at the state level. If it's a more localized issue, you may decide to advocate at the local level, but it's certainly something to pursue. And using those 10 tips I mentioned earlier is an excellent issue to advocate for at the state or local level. The next was about state safety and student safety or child safety generally. This was in two buckets. One was at the state level, the other was more local and specifically in the home in your local school. So at the state level, the focus was on mental health centers, wellness centers, and again, funding those in schools. If you think about the most requested service prior to COVID-19 in schools, it was related to mental health. Now, due to the pandemic, children are missing not only mental health services, but also just general health services. I mean, dental appointments have been missed, doctor's appointments have been missed. It's a much broader issue. So it is now at the forefront of certain state legislatures' minds. And so it's a great time to advocate for this issue now. We heard from a PTA leader who had advocated at the state level for funding for wellness centers in their state, starting at the high school, but then it also spread to the other schools in the state. So that was really inspirational to see how much traction they had made in Delaware. But then we also discussed how to keep children safe at home, everything from medication to alcohol to firearm safety. And the key takeaway for me here was to know what you're looking for as a parent. So how PTAs can help there is parent education so that parents know what to look for and know how to keep things safe. Sharing out disposal sites for old medications, sharing out basic gun safety, sharing out what vape pens may look like these days so parents know what to look for is something a PTA can do to help. And then finally, the session on equity, diversity, and inclusion. This was a very rich conversation. And so I'm going to go through the takeaways in a little more detail here. The first, many schools are establishing communities, and the PTAs can help in a couple of ways. The first is to start conversations about historical injustices, generally, specifically in your community, specifically in your schools. So understanding the past can help us understand how to change it. Also, the PTAs can help by helping to recognize blind spots, providing some training, being vocal about hiring. This is one area where representation really matters. Having teachers that look like the students is really important. And if we don't recognize our own blind spots, the hiring process will never change. If we don't get that training, the hiring process will never change. PTAs can help by starting this conversation or by being part of the training and pushing for those kinds of changes there. With respect for LGBTQIA+, PTA can help with focus groups and surveys, creating safe spaces that are not within the school administrator realm can really get some deep feedback about what the issues are to ensure safety and inclusion for those groups. Creating support groups for parents to come together to talk through any of the issues that are present. There's a lot of misunderstanding here about the needs of this community. And so bringing the parents and bringing the students together in this safe space can be a really great place for the PTA to play. With respect to special needs students, one area where school districts really fail is including parents in the decision-making process. PTAs are that bridge between the school and the parents. So PTAs can help to include parents in the school decision-making process. PTAs often know what decisions the schools are considering and when, and they can raise their hand and say, hey, have you sought parent input? They can create, again, a forum for discussion to solicit that parent input and then just share it with the school. The New York State PTA has some great parent resources around special education where other PTAs should feel free to take a look at that. With respect to practical advice and how can PTAs move the needle here, I think there's several ways that PTAs can play a big role. And my takeaways from yesterday were that PTAs should focus on options for our young people, unbridled options. The second is be focused on the outcomes. And the third is talk about their organizational values and beliefs. What does the PTA stand for? And put that out there. Make that be really, really visible. Specifically with advocating and moving the needle on diversity, start with state guidance and regulations that move those efforts forward and make sure that those are being applied at your school. The second is educating students, staffs, and families, and including all of those voices in the decision-making process. And then third, making sure that the diversity and inclusion lens is included with every decision. Anything from creating new bylaws to any new policy to any considerations that you know the school is weighing. Asking the question, are you looking at this with a diverse lens? Do you have the voice of the various communities that are represented in our larger school community? We need to make sure that we are putting everything through that lens in order for us to really move the needle. Overall, LegCon has been such a rich experience so far, and I know that today the meetings on the Hill are going to move things forward even more, and I look forward to seeing the outcomes. If I had to summarize yesterday's education, I would say advocacy is about educating others, providing tools, and encouraging action. That's how we get our PTAs to advocate. That's how we can get our families to advocate. Educate them. Give statistics, give information, provide the tools, provide position statements, provide the background information, and then encourage action. Provide template letters and ask that parents send them. Leverage your social media. Leverage your friend network. There's no wrong way to advocate other than to take no action at all. So any small step you can take is a step in the right direction. I look forward to many more LegCons in the future and to see the outcomes of this week's advocacy.